3.9 Inequalities and interval notation. When graphing on the number line, if you have a less than or greater than, you may use an open circle or use parentheses. This means the endpoint is not included. If you have less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, you may use a closed circle or use brackets. This means the endpoint is included. For this assignment, we're just going to be using parentheses or brackets. But later, when we're doing graphing, if you see an open circle, that means you're not allowed to use that point where the open circle is. If you have a closed circle, then you are allowed to use that number or that point. So example 1, we have x is greater than 3 or 3 is less than x. Now, if you read this going left to right, you might think they're different, but they're actually the same thing. What you need to do is focus on the x. It's very important because you're graphing what the x is allowed to be, and then you're going to read it according to your x. So for example, this one, you'll read x is greater than 3 left to right because the x is on the left side. Because the x is on the right side, you'll actually read this going right to left. So this still reads x is greater than 3. So these are the same inequalities. Also, you notice that the mouth is eating the x here and the small end is pointing towards the 3, and the mouth is still eating the x here and the smaller end is pointing towards the 3. So x is greater than 3. To graph that on the number line, what you're going to do, because it doesn't have greater than or equal to, it's just this situation here, you're going to use parentheses. So here, it's hard to see, but there is actually a parenthesis there. And greater than, anything greater is always to the right. So that's how you would graph x is greater than 3. Now, as far as interval notation goes, that's just the smallest amount of information you can put down to represent your graph. So you go smallest to largest in numerical order, left to right. So it starts at 3, and it's a parenthesis, so that's why there's a parenthesis there. That means you're not allowed to use 3, but you can use anything greater than 3. And then it goes forever to the right. So forever to the right is represented by infinity. And you always put a parenthesis next to infinity. Parentheses, that's important to know. Always go next to infinity. All right, now set builder notation. All you do for set builder notation is write down the inequality that they give you. So you would write down x is greater than 3, and then you just add a bar here and an x here, and then curly braces, curly braces. Now how you would say this is all x's such that x is greater than 3. That's how you would translate this into an English sentence. The bar here, this single bar, all that means is such that. So all x's such that x is greater than 3. Okay, let's go ahead and look at example 2. Here we have x is greater than or equal to 3, or 3 is less than or equal to x. So if you're reading it left to right, it would be 3 is less than or equal to x. But again, what you need to do, or what we want to do, is focus on the x. The x is important because that's what we're graphing, what x is allowed to be. So if you read it according to x is on the left side, so you would read this left to right, x is greater than or equal to 3. But since the x is on the right side here, you would actually read it right to left, x is greater than or equal to 3. And notice the big mouth still eating the x, and the small end's pointing towards the 3. Big mouth still eating the x here, small end pointing towards the 3. The only difference between this one and this one is now we have the equal to bar. So instead of using parentheses, what we're doing is we're going to be using brackets. So we're at the 3, we're going to put a bracket, and it's still greater than or equal to 3, so we're still going to the right forever. So again, the only difference between here is we're using a bracket instead of parentheses. So on the interval notation, we'll also have a bracket here. So that means we're allowed to use 3. Up here, we can't use 3. We could use 3.01. We could use 3.0001. You're allowed to use decimals and fractions and irrational numbers like pi and things like that. Anyway, but but you're not allowed to use the number 3 here, but we can on this one. In set builder notation, what you would do is you would just write down this inequality, x is greater than or equal to 3, and then you just add in the such that bar and the x and the curly braces. So this means all x's such that x is greater than or equal to 3, and that's your set builder notation. All right, let's try number 1 and number 2. This says x is less than or equal to -2, so we're going to graph that on the number line. So you just need to draw a line, and then all you need is 0 and that endpoint. This is your end point number. So -2's to the left somewhere. And then you always read it according to what your x is. It says x is less than or equal to -2. Less than means to the left. All your numbers to the left will be smaller than the numbers to the right. So it's equal to, so we're going to use a bracket. That means we're allowed to use the -2. And then it goes forever to -infinity. Now, how do we write this in interval notation? Remember, interval notation is just like a shorthand representation of your number line. It's the smallest amount of information you can write down to represent all of this. So what's forever to the left? That's -infinity. And remember, your parentheses always go next to the infinity signs. And then we're going all the way up to -2, and we can actually use -2, so we have a bracket. Now, as far as your set builder notation goes, what we're going to do is write down this inequality. X is less than or equal to -2. And then we just add in the such that bar, the x, and the curly braces, and then we're done. All x's such that x is less than or equal to -2. Okay, let's go ahead and graph this one right here. So again, we'll just draw a line, put 0, 4 is to the right of 0, so that's all the information you need. You don't need to get really fancy. And then x, always read it according to where your x is. It's on the left, so we'll say x is greater than 4. So greater than 4, where it's going to be to the right, and it's not greater than or equal to, so we have to use parentheses. So that means we're not allowed to use 4, but we could use 4.01, 4.001, etc. And then for interval notation, that's just the smallest amount of information we can put down to represent this graph. So we're starting at 4. We're not allowed to use 4, so we have to use parentheses. And then it goes forever to the right. And then your infinities always have a parenthesis next to them. Now, set builder notation, we'll just write down the inequality. And then you're going to add in the such that and the x and the curly braces. So all x's such that x is greater than 4. And then this one here, it could also be written, another way to write this would be, if you have the 4 on the left side and the x on the right side, as long as the big mouth's eating the x, that's equivalent. These two are equivalent. X is greater than 4, x is greater than 4. This one here, you could write it, if I put -2 on this side, x on this side, the smaller end is pointing towards the x, so the smaller end would have to still be pointing towards x. And you still read it according to x. X is less than or equal to -2.